Ethan Matthews, 38 years old, walked through the buzzing morning market of Briarwood Square, the sleeves of his designer shirt rolled up, his usually crisp tie hanging loosely around his neck. Known as the sharp-minded CEO of a leading tech firm in downtown Ridgeview, Ethan had everything: wealth, prestige, power. His penthouse overlooked the skyline, and his sports cars turned heads on every street. But on this particular Tuesday, after a major meeting was abruptly cancelled, he chose not to return to the office. Something in him stirred. He found himself aimlessly wandering through the heart of the city's flea market, where vendors hawked handmade goods and fresh breakfast smells drifted through the summer air. This place was alive in a way his boardroom never was. And for the first time in years, Ethan slowed down, letting life unfold without a calendar alert or corporate pitch. Near a cart selling apple fritters and fresh lemonade, a little girl, no more than 7, stepped into his path. Her curly hair was tied up with a worn elastic, her sandals frayed, her sundress faded by the sun and too many washes. Ethan instinctively reached for his wallet, prepared for the usual plea. But her voice disarmed him. "Mister, do you have a daughter?" she asked, eyes wide, unblinking. "No, I don't," Ethan answered, puzzled by her calm tone. She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Then, you've never had a daughter hug you?" The question caught him off guard, slicing clean through the noise around them. "I guess not," he admitted. Her next words nearly stopped his heart. "I've never had a daddy hug. I just wanna know what it feels like." No sadness, no begging. Just the innocence of a child aching for something she'd never known. Ethan felt something crack open inside his chest. Memories of a cold, distant father, the one who built empires but never built moments, rushed back like a tide. He crouched to her level and opened his arms. Without hesitation, she stepped into them. The embrace was brief, quiet, but it lit something ancient and buried in Ethan's heart. It wasn't grand. It was real. The girl leaned her head on his shoulder and sighed softly. Ethan's arms, usually crossed in strategy meetings or thrown around leather chairbacks, trembled slightly. The air around them shifted. Time slowed. A breath, a heartbeat, a truth long ignored. Everything condensed in that single moment of contact. He didn't know why, but he knew this was the most honest connection he'd had in years. A woman's voice cut through the hum of the market, calling urgently. A young mother hurried over, clearly flustered but not angry. She had soft brown hair tied in a simple ponytail and wore a plain white tee with faded jeans. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, reaching for the girl's hand. Ethan stood and smiled gently. "It's all right. She just asked a good question." He extended a hand. "I'm Ethan." The woman hesitated, then shook it. "I'm Rachel. This is Lily." The little girl gave a toothy grin. Rachel gave a quiet thank you, then gently pulled Lily away through the crowd. Ethan watched them fade into the movement of the market, his heart still thudding. Something in him had shifted. That hug had left a mark. He returned to Briarwood Square the next week, and the next. He told himself it was just curiosity, but deep down he knew. He was looking for that small family. Eventually, he found their stall. Rachel sold handcrafted jewelry on a faded tablecloth, and Lily sat cross-legged beside her, doodling away in a tattered sketchpad. Ethan didn't bring gifts or money. He brought fresh juice, new crayons, warm pastries on cold mornings. Rachel was cautious, her pride firmly in place. But Lily ran up to him with the comfort of a child who trusts deeply. Their conversations deepened. Rachel shared that she once studied graphic design, but life had taken a turn. Pregnant at 22, abandoned by Lily's father before her birth, she worked part-time in a diner and sold jewelry in the mornings to make ends meet. "I've always figured things out on my own," she told him once, almost defiantly. Ethan nodded, not offering charity, just listening. One day Lily got sick. Fever, coughing, glassy eyes. Rachel panicked, racing her daughter through crowded hallways of the Ridgeview Public Health Clinic. Ethan arrived at the market and, not finding them, asked vendors until someone pointed him to the hospital. He rushed across town, heart pounding. There he found Rachel in the waiting room, pale and exhausted, Lily limp in her lap. Without a word, he arranged for her to be transferred to private care. He spent the night at her bedside, reading fairy tales, adjusting blankets, singing softly. When the dawn came, Rachel found him asleep in a hospital chair, his hand still holding Lily's. She sat beside him, overwhelmed. "Why do you keep showing up?" she whispered, not expecting an answer. Ethan blinked himself awake and looked at her. "Because that little girl's hug changed everything. I don't want to miss what matters anymore." Rachel stared at him, unable to speak. And in that quiet, shared space of grief, healing and connection, something deeper began to grow between them. Something that neither money nor plans had ever built. If this story warmed your heart, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments what kind of love story you'd love to see next. Your voice inspires the next tale. There was something about that morning that Nathaniel Blake couldn't shake. For the rest of the day, during meetings, while signing documents, while receiving pitches from marketing directors and financial advisors in his sleek glass office overlooking downtown Havenbrook, his mind wandered back to a girl with wild curls and worn flip-flops, who had looked into his soul and asked for something no one had ever dared: a hug from a father. He had heard desperate pleas before, people begging for donations, partnerships, scholarships, but never something tau cru, tau intimo, tau absurdament simples. That night, in his penthouse apartment with polished marble floors and automated curtains, Nathaniel poured himself a glass of whiskey and stood by the window, staring into the distance, but seeing only a pair of curious eyes and a pair of tiny arms around his neck. It wasn't about pity. It wasn't about guilt. It was about recognition. That girl, Ellie, had unlocked a door inside him that had been sealed for years. The kind of door no success could open. And it left him haunted, in the best way possible. Nathaniel didn't return to the market by accident the following Tuesday. He told his assistant to block out the morning for field research, a vague term that made the corporate team nod respectfully without asking questions. The truth. He didn't want to admit he hoped to see them again. Carla. No, now she was Claire in his mind, and Ellie. There was something magnetic about them. When he found their stall again, surrounded by tangled strings of handmade jewelry and cardboard boxes, Claire looked up and smiled, not out of obligation, but with genuine surprise. "Back for more pasties," she joked. Ellie beamed and waved with a mouth half covered in guava jam. Nathaniel grinned. realizing he had missed this exact moment. "Something like that," he replied. And so, it began. Weekly visits turned into rituals. He didn't ask questions. He just showed up. Sometimes with sketchbooks, sometimes with a warm breakfast, sometimes with nothing but his quiet presence. And slowly, their world began to include him. It was Claire who first noticed how easily he fit into their routine. "You don't act like someone who runs a tech empire," she said one morning as they shared coffee from a chipped thermos. "You act like someone who's trying to remember what normal feels like." Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He was watching Ellie build towers with popsicle sticks. "Maybe I am," he finally said. Claire didn't pry. She wasn't the kind of woman who hunted for backstories. Maybe because she had her own. But Nathaniel wanted her to know. One afternoon, as the wind rustled the cheap tarp covering the booth, he told her about his father, Charles Blake, founder of Blake Tech, a man whose ambition eclipsed his presence at home. "He built an empire and left me in its shadows," Nathaniel said. "Taught me everything about business, nothing about love." Claire nodded, her eyes softer than usual. "Sounds familiar," she said, and they both understood that silence could be a shared memory too. By the third week, Nathaniel knew where to find them without even checking. Booth 47, under the green awning near the corner of Fletcher and Pine. He started working from home on those mornings just to stretch his time there. It was Claire who made him laugh again, really laugh, not just the polite chuckle reserved for boardrooms. Ellie, on the other hand, asked questions like bullets. Fast, unpredictable, deeply personal. "Why don't you have a wife? Do rich people eat cereal? Can I call you Nate?" He answered them all, sometimes with truth, sometimes with evasion, always with tenderness. One morning, he brought a foldable chair just to sit with them. No suits, no watch, just jeans and a hoodie. "You don't look like a CEO today," Claire teased. "Good," he said. "Because I don't feel like one when I'm here." And truly, he didn't. He felt like a man discovering a life he didn't know he was allowed to want. If you're enjoying this story, maybe it's because you believe in love that grows slowly, in people who find each other by chance but stay by choice. Subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. There's more heartwarming magic where this came from. And in the comments, tell us, what kind of love story do you dream of hearing next? It wasn't all sweet. Life never is. One Thursday, Nathaniel arrived to find their booth closed. No Claire, no Ellie. Just a folded chair and a note written in rushed, uneven handwriting. "Emergency. At Havenbrook General. Room 212. His stomach dropped. Without hesitation, he called for his driver, but then dismissed him halfway and ran the rest of the way through hospital corridors like a man with no name, just fear. He found them in pediatrics. Ellie was burning with fever, her small body shivering despite layers of blankets. Claire looked exhausted, her eyes red from tears and sleeplessness. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I did," he said, grabbing her hand before realizing what it meant. He stayed all night, telling stories, drawing funny pictures, Googling symptoms and watching cartoons with Ellie until she drifted into fitful sleep. Nurses looked at him sideways, not recognizing the man from magazine covers. Here he was just Nate, the man who brought juice boxes and comfort. The doctors said it was a bad flu, complicated by dehydration. Nothing fatal, but enough to rattle a mother who had no one to lean on until now. Claire cried once, quietly, when Ellie finally started eating again. Nathaniel held her, not out of duty, but because he wanted to. "Why are you doing this?" she asked in the dark. "Because she hugged me once," he whispered, "and it healed something I didn't even know was broken." Claire didn't answer, just held on tighter. The morning came, and with it a subtle shift. Something had changed. He was no longer just a visitor to their lives. He was part of them. The kind of man who made grocery runs, who brought batteries for broken toys, who paid for medication without making it feel like charity. He had stopped offering solutions and started offering himself. That was the real difference. And Claire noticed, every single day. Back at work, things were changing too. Nathaniel had stopped scheduling meetings past 6. He turned down an invitation to the Global Tech Summit in Zurich, just to be there for Ellie's art show at school. People in the office whispered. His assistant thought he might be ill. One of the co-founders asked if he was planning early retirement. Nathaniel just smiled. "I found something worth coming home to," he said. Claire's booth had new displays now, color-coded with lighting he'd helped her install. Sales went up. So did her confidence. She started talking about maybe launching a website, maybe quitting the diner job and focusing fully on the jewelry. Nathaniel listened, supported, but never pushed. This wasn't about rescue. It was about roots. And every time Ellie reached for his hand, he knew. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Claire Miller didn't believe in fairy tales. Not since she was 17 and her high school boyfriend left her alone in a hospital room with 2 ultrasound pictures and a future heavier than her shoulders could carry. She had learned to survive, not dream. To navigate the world with practicality, not hope. But on a Saturday morning in late October, as she watched Nathaniel Blake teach Ellie how to carve a pumpkin in their tiny kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and spilled juice, she felt something stir inside her that scared her more than any unpaid bill or feverish night. Love. Not the dizzying firework kind. She'd seen how quickly that burned out. No, this was quieter, truer. It was in the way he listened. The way he always showed up, even when he wasn't asked. The way he saw her. Not just as a mother or a woman struggling to stay afloat, but as a whole person with dreams, with humor, with value. And for the first time in years, Claire allowed herself to imagine, what if this wasn't temporary? What if he's not just passing through? That thought haunted her all day. She folded laundry and saw his hoodie mixed in with Ellie's pajamas. She opened the fridge and noticed the almond milk he liked, the one she never used to buy. Even her playlist had changed. More old jazz, the kind he hummed while fixing her toaster last week. She was changing, and so was her world, in small but undeniable ways. That evening, when he offered to take them out to the movies, she hesitated. Not because she didn't want to go, but because it suddenly felt like a date. Something sacred. She put on mascara for the first time in months. Chose earrings that matched. And when he saw her, Nathaniel didn't say anything poetic. He just smiled. But that smile held more honesty than any compliment. During the film, Ellie fell asleep in his lap, and Claire couldn't look away. That big, powerful man, worth millions, feared in boardrooms, was gently brushing a little girl's hair off her cheek with the tenderness of someone who had always been there. And in that moment, Claire knew. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't experimenting with charity. He was falling too. It wasn't perfect. Love never is. One night they argued. She had found out he'd paid for Ellie's school tuition in advance. Without telling her. She was furious. Not because of the money, but because it made her feel powerless. Like a project. Nathaniel didn't fight back. He just listened. And when she cried, not just from anger but exhaustion, fear, pride, he held her and said, I didn't do it because I think you can't. I did it because I want her to have what I never had. And what I didn't know I needed until you both gave it to me." Claire softened. Because in truth, she wasn't angry at him. She was angry at the world that had made her believe she had to do everything alone. That accepting help was weakness. That love was always followed by abandonment. Nathaniel was rewriting those beliefs, slowly, steadily, with every act of presence. And that terrified her, because it meant she had something to lose now, something real. They started spending weekends together. Grocery runs became family walks. Movie nights turned into storytelling rituals. Ellie began calling him Nate Daddy one night, completely unprompted. Claire froze, unsure how he would react. But he just smiled, lifted her onto his lap and said, "That's a pretty cool name." Later, Claire asked him about it. "Do you think it's too soon?" He shook his head. "I think she's just putting words to what she feels." And deep down, Claire felt it too. He belonged. He fit. In ways she never expected. In corners of her life she thought were permanently closed. And yet, despite everything, she hadn't told him she loved him. Not in words. Because saying it would make it irreversible. Would make her vulnerable. And vulnerability, for someone who had built walls out of survival, was the scariest thing of all. Then came the letter. A scholarship application for Ellie's art program. Claire had forgotten all about it. But Nathaniel had remembered. He printed it, filled in the parts Ellie couldn't, and left it on Claire's nightstand with a note. "She's a genius. The world deserves to see it. So do you." Claire cried when she read it. Quiet tears, the kind that fall when no one's around. She wasn't crying because of the gesture, but because of the way he saw them. Both of them, not as charity cases but as a family. That night, she sat beside him on the couch and rested her head on his shoulder. No words, just presence. And when he placed his hand on hers, she didn't pull away. Because this time she didn't want to run. She wanted to stay. To root herself in something finally safe. Finally hers. And maybe the final sign came one rainy afternoon, when she found a drawing Ellie had made. 3 stick figures holding hands under a sun. "That's you, me, and Nate," Ellie had written. "Our forever home." Claire stared at it for a long time. That word. Forever. It used to scare her. Now it felt like a promise. One she was ready to believe in. When Nathaniel arrived later, soaked from the rain and holding her favorite takeout, she opened the door and just looked at him. No speeches. No hesitation. Just look. "What?" he asked, chuckling. She stepped forward and kissed him. Long reel. "That's what," she whispered. And in that kiss she gave him everything. Every wall, every doubt, every wound. And he held it like it was treasure. Because to him it was. They didn't need labels. Or grand declarations. What they had was built in the quiet. In the ordinary. In meals shared, fears confessed. Hands held in hospital rooms. Laughter over spilled cereal. It was built in showing up, day after day, choice after choice. Claire had once told herself she'd never depend on anyone. That strength meant doing it alone. But now she knew, true strength was letting someone in. Trusting someone enough to say, "I need you here." And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of that. She wasn't afraid of love. Because love, real love, wasn't about grand gestures. It was about presence. And Nathaniel Blake had become her constant. Claire Miller didn't believe in fairy tales. Not since she was 17 and her high school boyfriend left her alone in a hospital room with 2 ultrasound pictures and a future heavier than her shoulders could carry. She had learned to survive, not dream. To navigate the world with practicality, not hope. But on a Saturday morning in late October, as she watched Nathaniel Blake teach Ellie how to carve a pumpkin in their tiny kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and spilled juice, she felt something stir inside her that scared her more than any unpaid bill or feverish night. Love. Not the dizzying firework kind. She'd seen how quickly that burned out. No, this was quieter, truer. It was in the way he listened. The way he always showed up, even when he wasn't asked. The way he saw her, not just as a mother or a woman struggling to stay afloat, but as a whole person with dreams, with humor, with value. And for the first time in years, Claire allowed herself to imagine, what if this wasn't temporary? What if he's not just passing through? That thought haunted her all day. She folded laundry and saw his hoodie mixed in with Ellie's pajamas. She opened the fridge and noticed the almond milk he liked, the one she never used to buy. Even her playlist had changed. More old jazz, the kind he hummed while fixing her toaster last week. She was changing, and so was her world, in small but undeniable ways. That evening, when he offered to take them out to the movies, she hesitated. Not because she didn't want to go, but because it suddenly felt like a date. Something sacred. She put on mascara for the first time in months. Chose earrings that matched. And when he saw her, Nathaniel didn't say anything poetic. He just smiled. But that smile held more honesty than any compliment. During the film, Ellie fell asleep in his lap, and Claire couldn't look away. That big, powerful man, worth millions, feared in boardrooms, was gently brushing a little girl's hair off her cheek with the tenderness of someone who had always been there. And in that moment, Claire knew. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't experimenting with charity. He was falling too. It wasn't perfect. Love never is. One night they argued. She had found out he'd paid for Ellie's school tuition in advance. Without telling her. She was furious. Not because of the money, but because it made her feel powerless. Like a project. Nathaniel didn't fight back. He just listened. And when she cried, not just from anger but exhaustion, fear, pride, he held her and said, "I didn't do it because I think you can't. I did it because I want her to have what I never had. And what I didn't know I needed until you both gave it to me." Claire softened. Because in truth, she wasn't angry at him. She was angry at the world that had made her believe she had to do everything alone. That accepting help was weakness. That love was always followed by abandonment. Nathaniel was rewriting those beliefs, slowly, steadily, with every act of presence. And that terrified her, because it meant she had something to lose now. Something real. They started spending weekends together. Grocery runs became family walks. Movie nights turned into storytelling rituals. Ellie began calling him Nate Daddy one night, completely unprompted. Claire froze, unsure how he would react. But he just smiled, lifted her onto his lap and said, "That's a pretty cool name." Later, Claire asked him about it. "Do you think it's too soon?" He shook his head. "I think she's just putting words to what she feels." And deep down, Claire felt it too. He belonged. He fit. In ways she never expected. In corners of her life she thought were permanently closed. And yet, despite everything, she hadn't told him she loved him. Not in words. Because saying it would make it irreversible. Would make her vulnerable. And vulnerability, for someone who had built walls out of survival, was the scariest thing of all. Then came the letter. A scholarship application for Ellie's art program. Claire had forgotten all about it. But Nathaniel had remembered. He printed it, filled in the parts Ellie couldn't, and left it on Claire's nightstand with a note. "She's a genius. The world deserves to see it. So do you." Claire cried when she read it. Quiet tears, the kind that fall when no one's around. She wasn't crying because of the gesture, but because of the way he saw them. Both of them, not as charity cases but as a family. That night, she sat beside him on the couch and rested her head on his shoulder. No words, just presence. And when he placed his hand on hers, she didn't pull away. Because this time she didn't want to run. She wanted to stay. To root herself in something finally safe. Finally hers. And maybe the final sign came one rainy afternoon, when she found a drawing Ellie had made. 3 stick figures holding hands under a sun. "That's you, me and Nate," Ellie had written. "Our forever home." Claire stared at it for a long time. That word. Forever. It used to scare her. Now it felt like a promise. One she was ready to believe in. When Nathaniel arrived later, soaked from the rain and holding her favorite takeout, she opened the door and just looked at him. No speeches. No hesitation. Just look. "What?" he asked, chuckling. She stepped forward and kissed him. "The long reel." "That's what," she whispered. And in that kiss she gave him everything. Every wall, every doubt, every wound. And he held it like it was treasure. Because to him it was. They didn't need labels. Or grand declarations. What they had was built in the quiet. In the ordinary. In meals shared, fears confessed. Hands held in hospital rooms. Laughter over spilled cereal. It was built in showing up, day after day, choice after choice. Claire had once told herself she'd never depend on anyone. That strength meant doing it alone. But now she knew, true strength was letting someone in. Trusting someone enough to say, "I need you here." And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of that. She wasn't afraid of love. Because love, real love, wasn't about grand gestures. It was about presence. And Nathaniel Blake had become her constant. Life, despite its newfound warmth, has a cruel way of reminding us that nothing is guaranteed. Just when Nathaniel thought the storm had passed, it came crashing back with an intensity he wasn't prepared for. One Thursday morning, the sharp ring of his phone shattered the calm of his home office. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, and a cold dread settled in his chest before he answered. On the other end was a voice, clipped and clinical, delivering news that felt like a blow to the ribs. His mother, someone he barely spoke to in years, had been hospitalized. Critically. Claire noticed the change immediately as he hung up, the lines on his face deepening. He tried to mask the turmoil, but when Ellie asked why her dad looked sad, the truth spilled out raw and unfiltered. His mother's condition was worse than expected. Acute, sudden, and requiring him to make a choice. The timing was impossible. His business was at a crucial stage. Ellie's school events were approaching, and Claire was counting on him to be present. But family called louder than ambition. He had to go. Leaving Claire and Ellie behind in their fragile bubble, Nathaniel flew to the coastal town of Silverpine, where his mother lived. A place he hadn't visited in over a decade. Walking the familiar streets, memories flooded back. Long dinners filled with silence, the cold distance of a man obsessed with power, the emptiness behind the smiles forced on family portraits. Now, standing beside her hospital bed, watching the frail woman who had once been his pillar fade away, Nathaniel felt an ache deeper than any business loss or failed relationship. But this was more than grief. It was confrontation. Would this final chapter rewrite their fractured story? As he grappled with old wounds and the bitter taste of unresolved pain, he realized the road ahead would demand more than strength. It would require forgiveness. Yet forgiveness felt distant, almost impossible. Meanwhile, back home, Claire struggled with the sudden shift in their life's rhythm. Ellie, confused and frightened, asked why Daddy had to leave. Claire masked her own fears behind a brave smile. But the nights grew longer and lonelier. The dinners without Nathaniel's quiet presence felt hollow, and the delicate balance they'd built started to wobble. Her own past whispers returned, those fears of abandonment, of being left alone once more. Doubts crept in. Was Nathaniel truly the man she thought he was? Could he withstand the weight of his past, or would it shatter them all? Days passed with agonizing slowness. Nathaniel's phone calls home were brief, filled with reassurances that felt more like promises he wasn't sure he could keep. The business pressures didn't ease either. Shareholders demanded results, deadlines loomed, and his CEO image started to crack under the strain. The man who had once commanded boardrooms with iron will now found himself battling ghosts from childhood, and the very real threat of losing everything he had fought for. Not just money or power, but love, trust, family. One afternoon, while sitting in the sterile hospital waiting room, a letter arrived for Nathaniel. An official notice that his mother's estate included a legal dispute. It was more than just a fight for inheritance. It dredged up secrets, accusations of betrayal that threatened to dismantle his carefully constructed life. The revelation hit him like a thunderbolt. His family's legacy was not just built on success but on lies and deception. This wasn't just a moment to grieve a dying parent. It was a battle for his identity, his future, and the fragile peace he had begun to build with Claire and Ellie. Meanwhile, back in the city, Claire found herself overwhelmed by the relentless demands of single parenting while juggling her small business. The support Nathaniel once provided now felt like a distant memory, and the walls she had started to lower around her heart began to rise again. Ellie missed her father terribly, her laughter replaced by silence, her drawings tinged with shadows. Claire's own exhaustion was compounded by a growing fear that Nathaniel's absence wasn't temporary, that the man who had promised to stay might slip away like the ghosts of their past. Then came the call that no one wanted to hear. Nathaniel's mother passed away in the early hours of a rainy morning, leaving behind not only a grieving son but a tangled web of family conflicts, emotional wreckage, and legal battles. The news shattered the fragile calm at home, sending shockwaves through Claire and Ellie's world. Nathaniel returned, broken but determined to face the chaos. Yet the reunion was bittersweet. The man who came back was not the same one who left. His grief was raw, his trust in himself shaken. The fights over inheritance spilled into his company, threatening his career. Claire and Nathaniel found themselves at crossroads. Love, once a steady flame, flickered uncertainly in the storm of pain and uncertainty. Could they rebuild from these ruins, or would the shadows of the past tear them apart? The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered but urgent. The fight to keep their family intact was just beginning. After the storm of grief and legal battles began to settle, Nathaniel found himself standing at a crossroads that tested the very core of who he was. The man who had chased success for so long was now forced to face a new definition of wealth, one measured not in dollars or power, but in love, presence, and genuine connection. Returning to Silver Pine for the funeral had peeled back old scars but also laid bare a fragile hope he hadn't dared to feel before. He knew that rebuilding wasn't about reclaiming lost ground, but about building something entirely new. Meanwhile, Claire struggled with her own tangled emotions. The absence of Nathaniel had deepened her fears of abandonment, yet his return stirred something unexpected, a flicker of forgiveness and longing. The walls she'd built to protect herself began to crack as she realized that love, with all its messiness and pain, might still be their salvation. Ellie too sensed the shift. She was growing up fast, the shadows of her father's absence lingering but now challenged by his hesitant but persistent presence. Their weekends together at the small park near their Moima home felt like fragile threads weaving a new family tapestry, though no one could deny the strain beneath the surface. At work, Nathaniel's focus sharpened. The legal disputes had drained much of his energy, but they also fueled a deeper purpose: to create a legacy that honored more than just financial success. He implemented changes in his company culture that emphasized balance, empathy, and human connection, inspired by the lessons he'd learned through pain. His team noticed a different leader emerging, less driven by ego, more by heart. Yet, the tension at home remained. Conversations with Claire were often tentative, laced with unspoken fears and past wounds. Nathaniel wanted to prove he could be the man they needed, but sometimes the weight of guilt and grief made him retreat into silence. Claire's own battles with vulnerability and trust surfaced in quiet moments, revealing a woman torn between hope and self-preservation. Their love, though tested, was not broken. It was simply learning to breathe in new ways. One evening, after Ellie's school recital, the family sat together under the soft glow of their living room lights. Ellie's laughter was a balm, a reminder of what they were fighting for. Nathaniel looked at Claire and saw not just a partner but a reflection of his own resilience. He reached for her hand, and for the first time in months, they spoke openly about their fears, dreams, and the uncertain road ahead. It was a fragile peace, but a beginning. The coming days promised challenges, but also the possibility of healing, growth, and a future shaped by choice rather than circumstance. Nathaniel realized that true success wasn't in the battles won or money earned, but in the courage to face life's darkest moments with love and honesty. He vowed silently that no matter what came next, he would not let the past dictate the future. For Ellie, for Claire, and for himself. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains of their modest home in Moima, casting a golden glow over the quiet living room where Nathaniel sat sipping his coffee. The tension of the past months had begun to dissolve, replaced by a fragile but steady hope. Today was Ellie's 9th birthday, a milestone marked not by extravagant gifts or grand celebrations, but by the simple presence of family. Nathaniel watched as Claire prepared breakfast, her movements calm and sure, a reflection of the healing that had begun to seep into their lives. Ellie was still asleep upstairs, unaware of the day's significance but carrying within her a heart reshaped by newfound love and belonging. Nathaniel reflected on how far they had come from the lonely man who once measured success by numbers on a screen, to a father learning the meaning of presence through the innocent eyes of his daughter. The echoes of past regrets still lingered, but they no longer held him hostage. The house was no longer just a shelter, It was a home built with care, patience, and the messy but beautiful reality of love. Slowly, Ellie's footsteps floated down the stairs, her smile lighting the room like the first bloom of spring after a harsh winter. She hugged her parents tightly, her voice bubbling with excitement over small, thoughtful gifts and promises of cake later in the day. Nathaniel felt his heart swell with a kind of joy he had never known, raw, unfiltered, and deeply earned. Claire joined in, her eyes glistening with tears as she watched their daughter's happiness unfold. In this moment, the scars of their shared past seemed distant, almost insignificant compared to the family they were building together. It wasn't perfection they had found, but something more powerful. The courage to keep trying, to keep loving despite the risks. Nathaniel's phone buzzed quietly on the table, a reminder of the world beyond their home. But for now, he chose to ignore it, embracing the rare and precious gift of time. Later that afternoon, as neighbors gathered in their backyard, laughter and chatter mingled with the scent of homemade cake and fresh flowers. Friends old and new came to celebrate Ellie, drawn not by the wealth Nathaniel once flaunted, but by the genuine warmth radiating from this small circle of resilience. Claire's handmade jewelry sparkled under the sun, a testament to her regained confidence and creative spirit. Nathaniel moved through the crowd with a quiet grace, no longer the distant CEO but a man transformed by love and responsibility. Ellie ran around barefoot, her joy contagious, her laughter a balm for wounds that had seemed too deep to heal. Watching them, Nathaniel realized that the richest moments were not in boardrooms or bank statements, but here, in shared smiles, in acts of kindness, in the messy beauty of imperfect lives intertwined. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathaniel found himself alone for a moment, gazing out at the city skyline. The lights twinkled like distant stars, each one a story, a life, a possibility. He thought of his father, the man who had built an empire but missed the chance to build a family. The weight of that legacy no longer crushed him. It became a lesson, a warning, and a call to live differently. He whispered a silent promise to himself and to Ellie and Claire, that he would never again let ambition blind him to what truly mattered. Success, he now knew, was not a destination but a journey, one walked with open arms and an open heart. Back inside, Claire and Nathaniel sat side by side, their hands intertwined, sharing stories and dreams for the future. They talked openly about fears, about the possibility of setbacks, and about the strength they found in each other. The walls between them, once so high and cold, now felt warm and inviting, built on trust and vulnerability. Ellie joined them, curling up in their laps, a living symbol of their hard-won peace. In that quiet moment, Nathaniel understood that family was not defined by blood or circumstance, but by the choice to stay, to fight, and to love. As the night deepened, the small family settled into their routine. A bedtime story, a gentle kiss, a whispered prayer for protection and gratitude. Nathaniel's voice was steady and calm, weaving tales of hope and courage that mirrored his own journey. Ellie's eyes fluttered closed, her breathing soft and even, a sign of safety and belonging. Claire watched them both, her heart full and her fears softened by the truth they now lived. That love, given freely and fiercely, had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Before turning off the light, Nathaniel paused, his thoughts lingering on the fragile future ahead. He knew challenges would come, old fears might return, But he also knew that they were no longer alone. Together they had forged a new path, one not without pain but rich with meaning. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Nathaniel felt ready to face whatever came next with courage and grace. If you followed Nathaniel, Claire, and Ellie's story and it touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and join our family of storytellers. Share your thoughts below. What moments in life have changed you the most? Your stories inspire us all. Because sometimes all it takes is one brave act of love to rewrite a life. Henrik watched Claire sleep, her breath soft against his chest, her hand loosely resting over his heart. The silence of the night wasn't empty. It pulsed with memories. They had traveled far, not in miles, but in grief, in forgiveness, in choice. He remembered the first day she looked at him with something other than fear. He remembered the day Mel stopped flinching when he raised his hand to wave. There were no trophies for this kind of journey. No applause. Just the quiet pride of waking up and choosing to stay. He kissed Claire's forehead, closed his eyes and felt, for the first time in his life, safe. The next morning, Claire sat in the garden with a notebook on her lap. Mel was drawing a treehouse blueprint with the enthusiasm only a child can summon. Henrik sat beside her, quietly sipping his tea. "Do you ever think about the beginning?" Claire asked. He looked at her and nodded. All the time. They didn't have to explain what they meant. They both knew beginnings were heavy things, born of endings, of pain, of loneliness. But what mattered wasn't how it started. It was how they chose to keep going. How they rewrote their story sentence by sentence, until the old narratives no longer defined them. That afternoon, Mel brought home a school assignment. "Family, what it means to me." Claire smiled as she read it. "Family," Mel had written, "is not about names or blood. It's about who stays when things fall apart. It's about who listens when you're not speaking. It's about who chooses you, even when you're not perfect." Claire cried, not because it hurt, but because it healed something she didn't know still needed healing. Henrik framed the page, and they hung it in the hallway. It became a silent oath, a daily reminder of what they had built, and what they vowed never to take for granted. But peace, fragile and sacred, often invites disruption. A court letter arrived weeks later. Mel's biological grandmother had filed for visitation. Shook them. Claire's hands trembled as she read it, fear and fury battling in her eyes. Henrik held her, whispered, "We will face it together." The legal fight was draining, awakening old traumas. But in the courtroom, when asked what Mel wanted, her voice was clear. "I already have a family." The judge looked down at her, then at Claire and Henrik, and ruled in their favor. Outside the courthouse, Mel clung to Claire's waist and whispered, "I chose you too." That victory brought celebration, but also a quiet shift. Claire began speaking at support groups for single mothers. Her story, once a burden, became a bridge. Henrik wrote articles about emotional intelligence in leadership, challenging men to redefine strength. They weren't just healing privately. They were becoming architects of light for others. And Mel, who once hid behind walls of silence, became known at school for her kindness. The kind of child who noticed when others were hurting. The kind of child who had learned by example that love was not loud, but consistent, steady, and brave. One rainy night, Claire found Henrik staring out the window. "You okay?" she asked. He turned, vulnerable in a way he rarely showed. "Sometimes I wonder if I deserve this," he said. She stepped closer, touched his face. "It's not about deserving. It's about choosing. And you choose us. Every day." He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "Promise me," he whispered, "that no matter what happens, we'll never stop choosing." Claire didn't answer with words. She kissed him deeply, an answer written in faith, in fire, in the scars they had turned into stars. Then came the diagnosis. A routine checkup revealed Henrik had a congenital heart condition. Manageable but serious. Claire sat beside him in the sterile hospital room, her fingers laced in his. "I'm not afraid of dying," he said. "I'm afraid of not having enough time to love you both more." Claire cried. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming beauty of the man he had become. Mel, sensing the gravity, made him a journal titled, "Why We Love You," filling it with drawings and notes. Henrik read one page every morning, letting their love be medicine stronger than any prescription. His treatment began. There were good days and hard ones. Days when he couldn't walk far, and days when he danced in the kitchen just to make Mel laugh. Claire never left his side. She became his strength without making him feel weak. Together they faced the fragility of time, not as a curse, but as a reason to savor. They made every moment sacred, burning candles at breakfast, slow dancing under the stars, recording lullabies with Mel's laughter in the background. It was never about how much time they had left. It was about what they did with every second they were given. On a warm evening, they hosted a small dinner with friends, laughter echoing through their home. Henrik stood to make a toast. "I used to think life was about achievement," he began. "But I was wrong. Life is about love. Quiet, daily, undramatic love. The kind that shows up. The kind that grows even when things fall apart. The kind that says, 'I see you, I choose you, I stay.'" The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Claire looked at him, eyes shining. Mel ran up and hugged his leg. In that moment everything made sense. Not perfectly, but truthfully. As the years passed, Henrik's health remained stable. Mel grew into a brilliant, compassionate young woman. Claire's business flourished. But more than success, what endured was the bond they had forged. Not of convenience or chance, but of deliberate love. They traveled together, built memories, told their story to anyone who needed hope. And every anniversary, Claire would whisper the same words into Henrik's ear. "You changed everything." And every time he'd smile and say, "You saved me first." Henrik passed away on a quiet morning years later, holding Claire's hand. Mel curled on the other side of him, all their foreheads touching. There were no goodbyes, just one last "I love you," whispered like a prayer. And though the world lost a man, two women remained changed forever by his love. At his memorial, Mel stood before the crowd, holding the old journal. "My father," she said, "wasn't born a hero. He became one by loving us with everything he had." And in that moment everyone understood. Real love doesn't die. It becomes the story others live by.